Tailoring. It's one of my favoriteest topics to help people. This is where we choose tools and how we're going to interface with each other, how we're going to tailor the approaches to projects and planning and implementing. And thankfully, Jim, your company offers a lot of project management training, myself as well. We do a lot of PM training. I go into the details of this. So please let us know if you need more details on this piece. But when it comes to the principle of tailoring, that's what this course is about, is understanding the principles behind some of the methodologies that we go into. Understanding if I'm spending too much time on managing my software, that's a perfect pain point that I see people complaining about a lot. High group resistance to any visual plan. Perfect example, I remember a project where we put so much work into making the Gantt chart beautiful. Then we took that file, we went to a local company, got them to print it off for us and laminate it. We popped it on a wall, and there it was, Jim, our nice big fancy Gantt chart. This is way back when. Did anybody actually look at it? No. Did we use it? No. Did we activate it into our meetings? No. It was just a Gantt chart, because that's what the project management book said we had to do, is make a Gantt chart. Okay, really? If you don't use the principle of tailoring while you're making that thing, it's not going to do itself. And you need all these other principles for it to actually work. Just saying. So for those of you that are coming in here as an individual, as a professional, and you run your own projects, if you ever ask yourself the question, why did I bother planning? Right? So if your plans constantly are like they turn into useless pieces of paper on a wall, that is usually an indicator that you didn't spend enough time with the principle of tailoring. So again, work with us on this. Go into that tailoring section and understand that it's okay to take time and make space to look at your next 2 weeks, your next month, and say, what tool, what approach to planning will benefit me? And if you don't know those tools, you got to maybe come to us and learn more about, the project planning methodologies and stuff. I think, Jim, you have a course that's specifically designed for the non-project manager. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things about the tailoring that I think is critical is that we've gotten to the point where in a lot of organizations there is a lack of respect for the tailoring process. Organizations tend to standardize their approach, hoping that they're going to be more predictable, more repeatable on their projects. You know what? I think most projects these days aren't served best by being predictable and repeatable. They're best served by being innovative and creative. In my experience, and I used to be a process improvement consultant, I used to go into organizations and I'd say, I think you need to do this standard way of your projects all the way through. And what I learned looking through the rearview mirror is that it might have served them on the project they were on when I was there, but very soon after I left, they ran into a project that was much bigger than the magnitude of that process would support, or they had these trivial little projects where this process was just overkill. It was just crazy. So there's the notion of tailoring at the project level of like how heavy duty do we have to be on our process for this project, but also within a project as well. For this particular issue with these people in this culture, in this environment, how do we solve this little problem over the course of the day? And I think that with the lack of tailoring, there's kind of a dumbing down of how we deal with projects. People are brilliant people. People are smart. And if we just sat together and said, how do we solve this problem? We're going to be able to solve these problems without leaning on a standard process that has been designed a priori before we even know what the heck our problem is and is unlikely to fit. An anecdote that I use that I think is really apt is the auto mechanic situation. Like if you had a problem with your car and you went to the auto mechanic and you saw the auto mechanic leaning on their garage door with a particular tool in hand, thinking, I don't care what your problem is, I'm going to use this tool to fix your car. You'd go, I'm going to go next door. It's just not going to work for you, sort of thing. So auto mechanics have hundreds of tools in their garage. They're not going to pick up a tool until they've peppered you with a whole pile of questions about what's going on, what's the problem you're trying to solve, all those things. They're going to plug into the ODB sensor under the dashboard, and they're going to get the engine to tell another story altogether. And only then are they going to pick up a tool to fix that particular problem. Auto mechanics have got it right. They've got it figured out. We can do this in our knowledge work projects that we do. When we think about our careers, we should always be adding tools to our toolkit and understand when they're relevant and when they're going to be useful on our projects. And we should not be afraid to tailor our approach to how we solve problems based on the problem at hand, rather than trying to come in a priori with a standard approach for doing things. And you know, that's a mindset that really has to shift.
It's interesting you say that, because even in our industry, those of us that have some certification, no matter which certification you live under, I'm under the PMI certification, they're all principles-based certifications now. PMI was not principles-based originally. It was more, even though technically it was process-based. It had that predictive thinking. And even though that wasn't their intention in previous PMBOKs, the way it was interpreted was always very process-based: input, output, formula in between, racy charts, etc. Right? Not that I'm bitter about that one, but it's just funny to me that that's how I interpreted it too. I remember taking that exam and going, okay, I have to know like 500 things. Okay, great, and boom, take it. So
well, part of it, Rose,
yeah.
Part of it, I don't think the blame is entirely on the organizations like the PMI. Part of it's our educational system.
Mm-hmm.
We are taught in a rote system where we are fed stuff and we regurgitate it in the test and then we forget it, sort of thing. But it's kind of a standardized way of doing things.
Well, I agree. And this is one thing I want to say is in the previous PMBOKs, most people don't read the first chapter of that PMBOK, where it clearly states these are not prescriptive things. But
Totally.
Nobody read that chapter. They all went directly to the matrices, the formulas, the inputs and the outputs, and assumed a predictive thing. So now in the current PMBOK, thankfully, how many decades later, it's a lot smaller, so to speak, but it's a lot more powerful in terms of what it's offering, I think, for us. And it's scary, I think, for a lot of project managers that have been trained under the previous traditional mindsets. Today's project manager is expected to know how to tailor. So any of my professionals listening right now who are looking to get certified, tailoring is an expectation. So you do need to build these tool sets. Each of these elements will add to your tool set that you can pull from in the right scenario. We are now expected to be able to respond in contextual and dynamic scenarios. Whereas in the previous iterations of what is project management, there was always this predictive thing. So here's my takeaway from this piece is, I do believe, Jim, it's important to have some predictive elements on a project all the time, just to help ground the team. So an example of a predictive element could be Monday morning kickoffs, where everybody get together and we all meet. That's a predictive element that I design. But to your point as well, we have to make space for that creative innovation. Why? Because we are always solving problems, especially in the midst of change. So teaching our teams how to work adaptive planning methods, and please don't get me started on agile. I have a little bit of an issue, and I'll tell you why. Every time somebody hears this method, a method of some sort, it's like we have this desire to, this is all we should use forever on every single project. What I am trying to communicate is waterfall is great for some contexts, okay? Agile is great for certain contexts of projects. What I want you to leave with today is the pain of when we're not delivering on time, when people check out of projects, a lot of that has to do with how we tailor it and why we're choosing the methods of planning and implementation that we do. So please, if you don't know what they are, come and talk to us about these things, because this is like a whole other set of courses in learning. But if you don't know what these tools are, it's time to start adding them so that when you show up at a project and change happens or a new context happens, you have more that you can choose from. And I love your analogy. I think that's the best analogy. I might have to steal that. So I'm going to try to find a cooking analogy for that one.